You're listening to the Clear Creek Resources Podcast from Clear Creek Community Church. To hear more, check out clearcreekresources.org.
All right, guys. Hey, welcome to the Clear Creek Resources Podcast. All right, so I have the three horsemen who who create the stories at Clear Creek Community Church. So we have Jon Coffey, Ted Ryskoski, and Jon Crump over here. And each of you play a different role in the development and the distribution of the stories that we tell at Clear Creek. And so this whole podcast discussion today is about the importance of stories, why people should tell their stories, and then how we at Clear Creek tell those stories and the impact that we hope that God does in people's lives as they hear and receive and watch those stories in their lives. So let's first just talk about some process stuff, just so people have a little context of what you do here. First, just talk about restate your name for anybody who didn't catch it the first time. We got a Ted and two Johns. And then what you do in this story creation process.
Okay. I'm Jon Coffey. I'm the director of story team here at Clear Creek. And my job is mostly to find stories and write up little summaries of them. And we keep track of all the stories that we're working on. So we have what we call the story cache. That's where we house all the story ideas and summaries that we have. And we have, I think, 112 in the cache as of the last check. So
that's awesome. Awesome. And you have a journalism background, right? Like that's what makes you, perfectly suited for this role.
Yep. I was going to be a sports writer. That didn't work out. So
now you watch sports,
stories.
but then you write stories.
Yep,
awesome.
Exactly.
Very good. Cool. Ted, what about you?
Yeah, I'm Ted Ryskoski, and I help oversee the video production aspect of the stories that we tell. And so often what will happen is we have a programming director that will kind of go through the story cache and kind of plan a little bit of an outline, a look ahead to see what stories should we be telling in our services. And then I'll get with Jon, move from there, and get them into production along with some other folks on the team and develop the stories, film them, and get them edited, and then deploy them in the services, and then that's generally when we pass them off to.
And it goes to me. Yeah, I'm Jon Crump. I'm the digital communications director, and so our team is really in charge of getting those stories out to the eye. We always say we want to see the eyes and ears. We want to reach the eyes and ears of everyone in the 4B area with a chance to take a next step. And that's kind of our whole thing about communications, but specifically story. We want people to be able to see those stories and be able to take a next step in their faith journey because of them. So.
All right. So before we get into like the nitty gritty of how we actually tell stories around here, how you guys tell those stories, let's talk about just the idea of story in general. Like, why are stories important to tell? Not just in a church service or on social media, but in general, like, why are stories important?
Well, I think the first reason, and probably the biggest one, that's like whether you're telling a story that's like Christian bent or just it's a story like fiction or whatever, is like stories are emotional. And I think because of that, they're more memorable than just pure information. And so you can hear facts, and depending on what those facts are, they can affect you in some way. But you hear a story that incorporates those facts, and it's like it requires some sort of response from you, whether emotionally or with actions or something. And so I think that's the power of story, is that they move you in some way. And so we try to, lean into that as much as we can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that idea there, move you, this idea of, next steps that we can all think back to movies we've seen, stories we've read. I mean, stories have the ability to mark us, and it can kind of change our trajectory, and it can influence us in a lot of different ways. And so I think stories are a really important part, especially of the Christian faith, because, it allows us to see what God's doing amongst us, and I think that can be a powerful way, whether to convict us, to inspire us, to move us in wherever He's leading us. And so, I know it sounds a little bit all spiritualized.
Well, no, but I mean,
awesome.
I think one of the things we talk about a lot with Story Team is that stories can say things in ways that sermons can't. And so, for the purpose of what we do at Clear Creek and what churches do with stories, it's like somebody can stand up and preach, and they can tell you, they can give you information, they can, call you to action, something like that. But when you see a story and you see somebody living that out, or a way that God like used some of that same stuff in their life, and then they, made a change or something like that, or God changed them through that. That's is relatable, and it's powerful in a different way because people can see themselves in that, and that's a really cool thing. And so that's not a knock on preaching at all.
Yeah.
It's just it's a different it's a different way to get to people's hearts.
Yeah, well, even within preaching, I mean, it's effective whenever you are teaching a principle, but then you can illustrate it with a story
exactly.
where people could say, okay, now I see what that looks like in life, and there's a little bit more of a connection in there. So that's what we're all trying to get to.
Yeah, and I think practically, I think of, there's been numerous times where we've been talking to people who were in a service where, let's say, they were doing baptisms. Somebody read their story, they got baptized, and it was in that moment that they're like, man, I realized that I'm ready to take that next step too. And so it was the telling of that story or watching it on video that moved them to take that next step. So even something as simple as that. So
How do you think people are impacted, not just hearing someone's story, but actually the process of them telling their story to somebody else?
Go ahead, John. You got this.
Okay. I mean, I think it's powerful. Like I've sat down with a lot of people and just heard them tell their story. And I think there's, when I'm talking to volunteers and helping people, like just, maybe they haven't done this a lot, and just helping them think through like, okay, here's what to expect when you sit down with people. It's like you almost feel like you're training them to be a counselor in some way, because you just don't know what's going to come out of this person as they're sharing with you like crazy stuff that's happened in their life, that God has done these big things, and it's emotional. I mean, just the telling of the story is emotional a lot of times for people, and so I think one of the things that I always tell our volunteers, and that I try to keep in mind, and Ted and I and Eric Harding and all of us have talked a lot about, is like you kind of have a responsibility as the person hearing the story to lead them a little bit. And so as you're listening to them tell their story, and a lot of times they're just walking you through brokenness or darkness that they've experienced in their life, is like you don't want to leave them in that spot as you end the conversation and walk away. And so, we try to like, so what is God doing in your life now? Or like, what is, like, if you could go back and tell your old self something, like, what would that be? And we want to leave them like, coming out of that stuff. And so I think it's just cool because you see like the whole journey kind of just in that process of them telling it. But I think it's a good practice, even for somebody who's not going to get up and share it in a video or something like that, but just to be able to be equipped to tell it to your small group, or to be able to share that with your neighbor or your coworker or something, is like it's a powerful thing to hear somebody just open up their life to you and talk about I don't have the proof or all the reasons and facts and everything to convince you that Christianity is the way, but this is what God did in my life, and I don't think you can argue with that, So.
Yeah, that's why I love that story in the Bible where the guy, Jesus heals the blind man, and the Pharisees are trying to get him all like, well, wait, he did this on the Sabbath? What happened? And these guys like, look, I don't know about all this stuff you guys are talking about. Right. I was blind, and now I see. Yeah. And so I think that also speaks to this idea of, people often think too that their story has to be some grandiose thing that happened, that they were, so far away from God, that they were, so deep in their brokenness, and then, God saved them. I think what's important is for people to realize is that, story spans the whole spectrum. Mm-hmm. And it's not always, this huge, dramatic, life-changing event. Maybe it's as simple as someone who has been faithful and felt like they've always known for a really long time that, their need for the gospel and how that impacts their daily life. I think the other aspect, kind of getting back to your question, is, when people realize that their story isn't, it's their story, ultimately it's God's story. Mm-hmm. And when they get to the point that they realize that, like, I'm not trying to shine this light on me, I'm trying to shine this light on what God's done in my life, I think that starts to then produce in them the ability to recognize on a daily, weekly basis what God's doing in their life, and to be able to articulate that in a way when they're sharing it with their small group, their family. And don't look at it as like, well, my story was how I came to faith, years ago, and came out of how God saved me out of my brokenness or something. That it could be as simple as, man, this is how God's growing my heart now, or so.
Yeah, your story's ongoing,
Yeah.
right? So that's, I think we try to help people remember that, or I try to remember that myself. Is like, just like when you sit down and read a book, there's different chapters and different things happen. And so it's not just your coming to faith moment. It's what's God doing today? What's God doing in this season of your life?
Yeah.
Yeah. I know for me, in our small groups, whenever I've started off a small group, one of the first things we do is we go through and have everyone do an exercise we call life maps. And you walk through, the highs and lows, who are the influential people in your life, and how you came to faith, and, all those things. And, I don't know if I would recommend it for everybody the way that I do it, but the way I do it is like, you share as much or as little as you want. Like, I'm not going to stop you, or I'm not going to make you go, so you can go 2 minutes, or you can go, 30 minutes or 45 minutes, and people just tell their stories. And the impact it has on that person, once you get somebody going, they end up saying stuff that maybe they didn't even think they were going to say, but now they feel like this safety in this new small group. And so it's pretty normal in our group to have people go 45 minutes, hour, maybe an hour and a half. I mean, it's just, I don't stop people. And people share stuff that they'll say like, wow, I've never shared that with anybody before, outside of my spouse. And there's a new responsibility even with that. It's like, all right, how can I help somebody? How can I shepherd or lead them through some of those things? Because there can be, sometimes we'll talk about like this emotional hangover. It's like you just laid it all out there, and then you leave group and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just did that. You know. And so how do you help people realize like it's good, like it's good that you just did that? And so let's talk through, what it looks like to now be in community. It changes the dynamics of that small group from then on out. I mean, it's like from the very beginning, everyone's like, okay, so we can be ourselves here. And you're like, yep, now we can start group.
And it's amazing when that one person does it, how much it affects all the other. Well, now I have the freedom to, this is what this is like.
Yep. So thinking about what you guys do, how has technology and advancement around like digital communications and things like that, how has that changed how you can tell stories? I mean, even just thinking back, 20 years ago, you couldn't do some of the things that you're doing now. And so what are the advantages of today and the technology we have that allow you to tell stories in a new way?
Yeah, like 20 years ago, I mean, you're looking at print material, right? You're looking at, if in a church service, you're looking at, somebody standing on a stage with a certain amount of people there, phone trees. I don't know. I mean, that's how you're getting people to come places, right? To hear those stories. You have to be present to hear stories, or you can read it. With the printing press, you were able to send mass media or whatever. But now, obviously, social media is something that we can share stories. Video, also, I mean, it feels endless right now on how you can tell a story. The amount of channels that we have, channels is a word for just opportunities that we have to communicate with people. And so, it's hard to like narrow it down to one thing, because we sit around like, oh, we could tell it this way. Oh, we could tell it this way. Or we could get it to our people this way. Short stories, longer stories, depending on the audience. So it's a really hard question to ask. So it's endless.
Yeah, because you get a lot of stuff that you got to think through. It's like, all right, we're going to post it on this. And even just the format changes how you, what the end product, I guess, is. Whether that's, hey, this is going to be short clips on this social media platform, or it's going to be, a longer one on YouTube or whatever. And so,
So me and Ted, we work a lot with that. So works with our team. Kate Mendoza, shout out. She takes a lot of the social media stuff and posts them and writes a lot of copy for that. And so, we work early on in the process to say, is this going to be a long story, a short story? Are we going to do a long version of it, a shorter version of it, based on what channel it's going to go on to? Basically, is it going to be an Instagram reel? Is it going to be a Facebook video, a YouTube video? Is it going to be vertical? Is it going to be wide? So those are some of the mechanics we have to think through. And the reason we think through that is so that gets the most eyes on it so that people can take next steps in their faith journey.
Yeah, I think it's crazy, even in the last couple of years, just how different we've viewed some things. Where before, and still probably now, we would view our Sunday morning services as like it's the prime deployment of some of these stories. But now through social media and some other channels, I mean, we're able to get it in front of a much larger audience of even Clear Creek people. We don't have people that are part of our church that show up every Sunday. Sometimes they might miss and here and there. So with the combination of both right now, I think we're able to get pretty good saturation for our audience here in the 4B area. But it's crazy to think of what it's going to look like even a year or 2 years from now.
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole purpose of Clear Creek Resources when we launched that a couple years ago was we wanted to help people walk with Jesus and be resourced the other 167 hours of the week. And, the stories is just another opportunity to do that.
Yeah. I think, John, if you can speak a little bit to this idea of being a digital missionary. I know we've been throwing that around the office some more, and I think you have some really good insights on just how social media technology allows us to kind of be missional.
Yeah, so here at the church, we have stories, and we're telling other people's stories, but we get to a point where, John, you were kind of talking about, we all have stories to tell, like we literally all have a story to tell. We're all living a life, right? And so social media is there's, I don't know, billions of people on Facebook alone, and that is a growing number, but there's other social platforms where people are on. TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, not as much on Twitter anymore. But anyway, people are posting every day the things that they're doing in their life. And so when you think about that most people are on digital platforms, really it's a question that I like to pose to people is like, what story are you telling through your timeline, through your profiles? What is prominent on your story? Are you talking about if you want to see the idols of your heart, you'll probably look at your own profile or your timeline because it feeds you what you actually want. And so it's a reflection, it's a mirror looking you right in the face. And so I would encourage you just to think about it. What's your strategy on posting things? What's your strategy on what you look at on social media? I know that's aside from story, but if you want to share your own story, you have an audience to do that, and that's through social media. So
I do think that's good. Like, what story are you telling? What story are you listening to? Because I think social media asks both of those questions. But I think in the social media conversation, it's like we live such like curated lives with all the social media stuff, and that really does fit into story so well because I think we see it, where you have these people who have these incredible stories of, addicted to drugs and now they follow Christ and all this kind of stuff. And a lot of those people are more willing and ready to share because they just have nothing to hide anymore. It's like everything's out there. People know everything. And so they're more willing. But the people who are more careful and more conscious of their image and what people see and all that kind of stuff, I think those people are there. It's like it's a tougher nut to crack, so to speak, because those people don't want to share all the nitty-gritty details. And I know I fall into that, so speaking from experience there. But I think it's cool because the more you are willing to open up and say, like we've been saying already, is like, this isn't my story. This is God's story. I think it frees you up to be more open and honest about who you really are, but also what God has really done in your life. So,
all right. So you guys are extremely talented at what you do. Like I've always appreciated. I mean, our staff is just rock stars. Yeah. I mean, really, you are awesome at what you do, and I want to almost like pull the curtain back a little bit because I want people to be able to see not just what you do, but how and why you do it. Like what is the philosophy and the values that you hold as you're putting together these stories in a way that would, tell that story that would impact somebody's life as they're hearing that story. So what are some of the things that you are trying to accomplish or some of your philosophy around story as you are, grabbing some of those things and creating and filming those things, and then even as you are sharing and distributing those things far and wide. So what are some of those values and things you're trying to accomplish?
I'll let you start.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things I spoke to a little bit earlier. Recognizing that your story is really God's story, and that ultimately, when we're telling a story, we want to make sure it's pointing to God and what the gospel's done in life. Not that Jesus is the hero, not the individual. Because I think ultimately, when we get to that place too, that helps them articulate in a way that's more tangible and can inspire people. But I think practically, we have values that are distinctive to Clear Creek Community Church. Things that we would say, are illustrative of Christ working in someone's life to become a fully devoted follower. And so I think we want to tell stories of people that help illustrate some of those values in a way that can inspire people to see that as a result of what the gospel does, how it changes people, how it moves them in different areas. So, that could be as simple as, generosity, how, someone, those stories are a little bit harder to tell because generally, especially when it has to do with money, people are like, hey, I don't want, but I don't want to.
Yeah, they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to be the hero.
They don't want to be the hero.
It is hard, yeah.
But ultimately, that's a symbol of their release of that is seeing how God has resourced them and how they're going to be free with that. And so, whatever those values are, I guess that, we would want to make sure those are highlighted.
I do think it's important, just helping people realize that the stories we tell, we want Jesus to be the hero. So it's like you get to the end of it and you're like, all right, did this make this person feel like, oh man, they're super generous. We need to be more like that person? Or was Jesus the hero of this story? Yeah. Same thing with Clear Creek. Did Clear Creek become the hero in that story? Like, oh man, I got really involved in Clear Creek and got to know some other people, and man, it was such a great church. And it was like, well, Jesus didn't even show up in that story at all. Yeah. It was all about how great Clear Creek is. And so I think y'all do a great job of thinking through, okay, what's the gospel thread throughout this where Jesus is the one exalted in this story and not the person or Clear Creek. What else?
Yeah, I think all that stuff that he said is stuff that we're always striving to do and make sure that we keep at the forefront. One of the things we tell people is tell us your story, not a sermon. So we want people to tell us their story and what has happened to them.
Me.
Yes, me. Yeah, and because people got a lot of good things to say, but a lot of times we want to hear what God has done in your life. So we always say Story Team exists to tell the stories of God working in and through the people's lives of Clear Creek Community Church. And so they're really, that helps keep in perspective. It's like they're God's stories, and they're just happening through these people who are here.
Yeah, that makes sense. I could imagine people, they want to tell you what they learned from that experience, not necessarily the story of how they learned it. Yeah. Right. So they just want to
Exactly.
Yeah, I can get that.
And some of it's helpful stuff.
Yeah.
But you got to hear the story first to have the context for it to make sense.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, when the stories come down to me, I mean, I mentioned that as like a down to me in a hallway sense.
Literally down the hall.
Yeah, it comes down.
The table.
It comes down the hall, right, digitally to the hallway. When it comes down to, y'all have done such a great job of thinking through what this story is, what it's going to you've given write-ups about it, and so I know exactly what it is by the time it gets to me, and so it's pretty easy to make sure, okay, this is how we want to present it to the public, and so really there's not much thought. So is it going to go on Clear Creek Resources? Yes. Is it going to go out on social media? Yes. How then does it affect the audience that it's going to see? And again, like I said earlier, we're focusing on trying to see everyone in the 4B area be able to take a next step based on these people's stories. Because everybody has probably a similar story in their life, whether it be exactly that specific story in their life, or they know somebody, or they could kind of take what they've heard and place it onto their life as well. And so we want to give them an opportunity to take a next step. And so, I don't know, you said pull back the curtain a little bit. I mean, do you want more technical info?
I will say, that brings up a good point. You're talking about presenting a story to people and to an audience or viewers or whatever. I think it is important, something that we try to do as much as we can is like, stay true to the story. So when somebody entrusts us with their what has happened in their life, what God's done through their life, it's like we're not deviating from that, you know. So we're not trying to make it seem more dramatic than it was, or we're not adding in details to spice it up a little bit or anything like that. You know, I mean, we're trying to stay true to what actually happened, and that's my journalism background coming out. But it's important to do that because it's a weighty responsibility when somebody trusts you with that kind of information, because it's vulnerable, it's very personal, and we want to be really aware and conscious of how we're sending that out to people. And so partially we do that because, we want to keep that trust with people. But we also want to protect people. And so sometimes there's stuff in their story that's, it really puts them out there, And so we want to just help them be set up to win as much as they can be, so that it's their stories being communicated clearly and that people get what they need to get from it, but they're not distracted by some of the messiness and things like that. So we try to think through that. Ted, let me just say, Ted does such a great job in his job. We've worked together for 7-ish years now. And
I don't even know what happened last week. So
yeah, right. 7 years though, but man, Ted is like, he's been my guy like since day one when I joined staff and had literally no idea what I was doing. He's been just so helpful, and he's so good at his job, and is a very valuable member of the story team. So
I think one thing to add to that is like the intentionality of like what's going to be the best way to tell this story, and even too like the narrowing. I'm trying to think of pulling back the curtain a little bit. Sometimes there's a huge amount of complexity to somebody's story that really you could have like 5, 6, 10 different mini stories or chapters, just even in the one. Yep. So I think more recently, what we've been intentional of trying to do is have more stories that we have to deploy, whether in a service or online, and in a shorter length. So try and distill kind of those mini stories that, is very true to what happened, but I don't want to say we want to get to the complexities where it's highlighting the right things, it's pointing to the right place, but yet it still can be inspiring and hopefully move people to a next step. And so I think, that is gaining a little bit of traction here.
Efficiency is kind of our where we're running right now.
We were for a long season trying to really delve in and have stories be a little bit longer, but I think practically for what we're doing in our services right now, deploying them the way we are online.
And how people consume stories.
Yeah.
And literally everything in life right now is quick, fast.
Bite size.
And so, outside of podcasts, what we're doing right now, and sermons, there's very little long form media being consumed. Yeah. And so, if you want to pull back the curtain, those are the type of languages. Now, we always have to hold the balance of like, do we just want to get views or people to see this or shares and all this stuff? No, absolutely not. That's not what we want. We don't just want views on social media or subscribers and all that stuff. We want people to take next steps, but you can't take next step if you don't see it.
Yeah.
So we're constantly holding those two things in, and so the short videos, if I can say that, are kind of playing into that as well.
And I think even when you talked about like this idea of like what is your storyline, what's your digital presence communicating, I think some of the resources that we're making, we're hoping that people are able to utilize those to share them, to encourage others to see them, so that it can maybe spark conversation, and it may be 6, 7, 8 videos over the course of 6, 7, 8 months that someone might say like, hey, I've noticed, or I don't know.
Yeah.
So
that's the power of the share button, right, John?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Smash that.
That's the most powerful button on social media. It's the share button.
Man. All right. So Ted, I want you to, since you're the one who does a lot of the video capture and you're in the room, and I mean, I've heard you whenever you are asking someone questions to help draw out their story. Give us a little bit of a picture of what that looks like. I want to know how much, let's say, footage do you have that you then have to edit down to maybe a 3-minute story, and how do you know, what's the process of actually getting some of that footage? Like how are you shepherding and guiding that conversation and get people to tell more and more?
Yeah. You know, it's definitely a process, and it's definitely something that I've learned over many years of doing this. I think one of the biggest things is what Jon does, is really kind of having that pre-interview to find out what is the actual story. And then when we're interviewing someone in, say, a more longer format, I mean, it's not uncommon to have, 45 minutes, an hour plus. I think it depends on how articulate the person is, how comfortable they are saying it. But there's a gazillion things running through the back of my mind. A lot of it is on the back end when we go to edit, just kind of as I'm listening. I have ADD, so I'm like kind of doing.
Yeah.
But what that allows me to do, I feel like sometimes, is process multiple things where I can be engaging in the conversation, but then also be thinking about, okay, how can I take that piece there and string it to the piece that they said before? And so often it's going back and helping them say, okay, what I heard you say is this. Can you help, articulate that in a way, or condensing?
Yeah, Ted's really good. He's like editing in real time sometimes when we're doing some of that. I mean, I don't always sit in, but the times that I do, it's like watching him do his thing. It's like, he hears them say something a certain way, but maybe they fumbled through the line a little bit or something like that. And so if you're somebody who's experienced this, he might have you say the line a few times. And for me, sometimes I'm like, oh man, didn't we already get that? But he's got this real specific, like, this is how I need this to, like, I need to get this line, and it's cool to watch, because then when you see the finished product, you're like, oh man, it's seamless, It looks great, sounds great, and everything.
There's so many things that people don't think about.
Yeah.
I mean, someone might use insider language, and they reference something that, if you go to Clear Creek and you know what that means, but this audience is going to be maybe people on Facebook or whatever, and like, we can't use insider language. We need to use things that are relatable and accessible to anyone.
Yeah.
And so it's like, hey, say that again, but this time don't say navigator, say my small group.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think it's also too, like what Jon said, kind of helping shepherd people, like kind of protecting them for themselves. Like, different people we can be talking, but what it looks like on video might be like, oh man, that guy is kind of a jerk, or that lady doesn't really know what she's talking about. Or so I think it's trying to be helpful too, to honor them and maintain some of their, I don't want to say dignity isn't the right word, but their character, and be true to that. So
how much does it really, it's probably you two guys, how much does it pain you to take 45 minutes of the story? I mean, the conversation you have with someone, and it's like, what probably no one else is going to know, because you got to hear the whole thing, and now you've got to figure out what are the key things that I can put this in a way that people, they have the attention span to watch it for 3 minutes, and how much does it pain you to, like, cuts things out of that to get down to where it needs to be?
It's difficult. I think he feels it on the front end.
I was gonna say.
I say
Ted's just the butcher. He's just like heartlessly slicing things. No, not really. But you've learned the art of that. I think.
Yeah.
I feel it so much more. It's like the kill your darlings thing that they talk about in preaching when you're writing sermons. You have to cut things out that are good. And you're not cutting them out because they're bad. You're cutting them out because of space and time. And I feel that a lot, because I'm like, I want people to know everything. This makes it so much better to know this piece or whatever. And he's like, we don't have time.
Yeah, and I think you feel that most even on the front end before we even get to the filming, because as we're talking about the story, he knows even more than what we've decided on of, hey, what are we going to tell in this? And so on the back end, it is really difficult. I think there's a lot of other players that get involved, whether it's, teachers, the programming director, campus pastors of, different time that we're trying to get something down into. So,
well, to really pull back the curtain, it's like our team fits in a bigger team that fits into a bigger team, so how many times have we had, like, we've done a story, we've gotten it all worked out, and we have agreed, like, this is the story, this is good, we're all stacking hands on it, and then somebody comes down and is like, hey, we don't have that much time anymore in the service for that, so your 3-minute story now, you have 1 minute, and it's like, all right, I don't know what we're gonna do.
or
and
it's
that's where it's just like, all right, Ted.
yeah, or it's
tell the
like
full story,
the Trenton
Oh,
Smith
man.
story.
Yeah.
So Trenton Smith story, a long time ago, great story that we
Fantastic.
shot about a guy who's just utilizing his job, his career, some resources that he has,
And tell them his job and career.
He's a salesman, a distributor for
he works for Oliva
cigars. And so he was just a lot about how utilizing, again, he's got this cigar room at his place that he opens up, hosts small groups, and just tells a story about how vulnerable people and honest people often are willing to be while they're smoking a cigar. And I think it just didn't go over as well, but man, it was a great story, but we never put it out just because I don't think everybody was settled on how that went, but it was fun.
Yeah.
Some great B-roll, though.
There was a lot of great B-roll.
Yeah. And so what's B-roll for anyone who doesn't know what that means?
Yeah, so B-roll would be...
Could we put some B-roll over this?
put
right now?
B-roll over this.
There you go. Yeah.
Cue the B-roll. Any supporting footage that you'd place over top of like the interview or your primary role, that your A roll versus B-roll. So
Yeah. So it's
goes
kind of
back.
like I don't know how. There's no sound to it generally.
Correct.
Usually, it's like the narrator. You have a
Yeah.
shot on a person, and as you're continuing to hear that, then you see other images.
Yeah, it's like you cut away to...
So you're listening to somebody talk, and then it's like, all right, well, that's boring to continue to look at them, so we're going to look at something else now to
Yes.
keep it interesting and to maybe reinforce what they're saying.
Correct.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And what it does, I mean, when you're telling a story, what happens is, your brain is imagining what the person is saying, and when you can have B-roll things, what it does is it helps that person's imagination, which helps them to then fully immerse themselves in that story
Yes.
all the more. And we're so conditioned to seeing things like that we don't even think about it. You
Correct.
can go watch some, ESPN 30 for 30,
Right.
and you're just seeing that the whole time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, that's what a documentary is. I mean, it's a lot of B-roll and interviews, and it just happens, and it helps bring it to life. And so y'all do a great job of that. All right. What have been some of the stories that have personally impacted you as you are helping to develop them and tell those to the church at large?
I think I could do an entire podcast just on that question. So
Just retelling stories.
I'll just tell you every story that we've done.
Yeah.
And, But I don't know if you guys have one.
one?
Yeah,
I'll come in with
I'll
something
start.
different.
So I've got two. One recent story we told was again. I just get them after, so I'm like, sweet. I'm seeing them like everybody else. But the Jordan St. John story, disc golf.
Golf, shout out.
I know Jordan, and it just a great story of small groups bringing somebody back, and then him coming to the faith. So that's awesome. And then it got disc golf in the story as well. So I appreciate that. And then Joe Stockdale, just his story about feeling out of community, randomly getting a Bible from somebody at a restaurant, and then being discipled by some of his friends, and then ultimately getting baptized after it. I mean, super cool.
That was what? That was Easter 2 years ago? Is that right?
I think so. I think so.
It's hard with COVID. I can't remember anything.
right.
Yeah.
Somewhere in
I
that
remember
window.
COVID was related to it somehow. Either was it an online service that was
Well,
in?
he
or
was
is it-
attending online first,
Yeah,
and then
that's right.
that's
came in
right, that's
person.
right, yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was around there.
Yeah. What about y'all? Any good stories?
Yeah,
that you-
I think for me, one was it another Christmas one?
Austin?
Big weekend, Austin
That was
Weber.
Christmas.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was
Yeah, we did
Christmas.
Christmas. That was one that there was so much more. Talk about trying to cut that down.
Yeah.
There was so much more of that story, but I just thought it was super powerful. This idea of a guy who, very well educated, very well read, basically gets
He's a
invited.
lawyer.
Yeah, he's a lawyer. Gets invited to read a Bible. Ends up coming to faith, and it just like radically changed his life to the point where he's like, man, if I'm going to believe what this book says, I can no longer do the things that I'm doing. And so he quit his job at the law firm he was at, doing whatever, litigating he was doing, because he says he was like, you kind of had to be ruthless in a way that was opposite of what the Bible was saying. And so, again, it changed the trajectory of his life. And it was just really inspiring.
And one of the things I loved about that story, that's one of my favorite ones too, but one of the things I loved about that was he was reading the Bible as a lawyer. And so he's like, I sit in depositions all the time. I hear people lie, and I know what that sounds like. And he's like, you read the Gospels, and they're not lying. You know, like these are people telling the truth. And that was it was powerful.
Yeah.
It was
Well,
really
and he
cool.
talked about like how I started reading it to disprove it. Like he's like, I didn't believe it, I had no interest in it. It's like I was reading this thing to be able to poke holes in it, and then that happened.
Yeah.
So I just remember he got to the point where he was like, like Jesus, he sort of realizes, they're going to kill Jesus.
Yeah.
And it was like, I think he told his wife or a fiance, I don't remember what she was at the time, and she was like,
Called her up. He's like,
Yeah.
wait, they're going to kill him. She's like, yeah. That's
That's the story.
it was so good. Yeah. It was so good.
Can I share a couple?
Yeah,
more?
go ahead. Yeah, man.
So, I mean, like I said, there's a lot, but Jay Ellis is one that I feel like you just have to bring up in a conversation like this because his story is just so, it's movie worthy. Like they could make a film about Jay Ellis's life and it would be incredible. But he's a guy that's like, addicted to drugs, all sorts of stuff, went through rehab, was just messed up with a lot of bad people in his life and all this sort of stuff, like literally running the opposite direction. And God just gets a hold of him, changes his life. He literally was like blind and got his sight restored, all this different stuff, and came to faith. And now he leads a ministry at our church for people who are struggling with addiction of different kinds. And just, I mean, incredible dude, just in the way that God's worked in his life, but incredible story and just the fact that it's continuing to go on and affect other people. And it's amazing. So he's been inspiring just to get to talk to him and be around. And that's what a lot of it is like just getting to sit down with some of these people and talk to them and just hear their heart for what God's done in their life is just like, you can't walk away unaffected by that, And so some other ones that come to my mind are like Dave Frazier, I think was one of the first stories that I worked on when I was here, and get to sit down with this guy who like fought in Vietnam and came back and was just, screwed up from some of the experiences that he had with that and the context of just historically what was going on, and struggled with alcoholism and but ultimately came to faith in Christ, and it changed everything for him, changed the trajectory of his life. And he's pouring into other vets now who are struggling with some of the same stuff because he's been down that road. And man, just it's cool stuff. So those two are big ones. One of my absolute favorite stories that we've done is it was Sarah Gadsby before she got married. So now she's Sarah DeWitt, rock star on the story team. She's been a volunteer with us for years, and one of my just like, I don't know, she's just so fun to work with and is so talented, and we're very grateful to have her. But she did a story that was like her story, and it was kind of her story since she had joined Story Team. And so it's a story about using your gifts, and like one of her gifts is writing, and so she writes on the Story Team. But as she's telling the story of using her gifts, she's talking about stories that she's worked on and how they've affected her. So you almost have this like story inception thing going on.
It was awesome.
which is super cool. But she just gets to share some of her heart for that, and it's just a microcosm of like, this is what Story Team is and what we try to be about. And so those are, like I said, I could list off probably 20 more, but for time's sake, I'll leave it at that.
Well, that's what's awesome. And, you guys are in a seat to be able to hear these stories, and then you have these connections with people from, all the different campuses, because you sit and you hear their stories. I mean, I remember you talking about going with Dave Frazier and going to some of those meetings where he's, walking with other veterans and what that was like. And
I sat in a very uncomfortable veterans meeting that was, I don't think I was supposed to be there, but I kind of just went in, and so you get to do some fun stuff like that,
and it's awesome. I mean, and it's a cool to think it's not just you guys that get to do that. It's we have volunteers that say, man, this is the ministry that I get to use my gifts and glorify God in. But man, I'm getting poured into so much. It's so encouraging, and so man, since y'all do kind of three different things within the story pipeline, there's a lot of places where volunteers can plug in and serve alongside you, which is really cool. Awesome. All right. Any cool stories that are coming up, and maybe just a little bit of a teaser that people can be looking forward to in the next couple of months or so?
Yeah, I mean, there's There's always stuff coming up.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ones that are going to be coming up most recently that are really cool is some stories that highlight some missional living, just people really just doing either some practical things or radical things to share Jesus with the people around them, whether it's their top 5, their neighbors, different stuff. So hopefully that's... Yeah. Hopefully everybody else enjoys them as much as I am. We're as excited about them as I am.
I've had some conversations with some guys in the last couple months from Pathway to Peace, which is the ministry that we alluded to earlier with J. Ellis. But guys who have just walked through some seasons of addiction and stuff like that. And I mean, just incredible stories of just the way that God has brought them, from darkness to light and all that kind of stuff. And so I don't know what we're going to do with those stories. I haven't heard any plans of what's coming with them, but I'm excited whatever we end up doing with them because they're going to be really good. So.
That's the beautiful thing about the cache that you talked about is developing the place where as stories happen before they get forgotten, we can kind of capture them and figure out a way to harness them.
Yeah. I think what's cool, like, just hearing all these stories about all these different types of people telling these stories, the common theme, obviously, that we're telling is how Jesus has got a hold of their lives. You got a lawyer, you've got just all kinds of different people so that everybody that hears those stories can be like, oh, that guy believed in that? He's not a dummy. Or... They're not just like some weird person that doesn't believe, these are people that are educated people that are, highly educated people that are believing in what Jesus has done. And so, man, I just love those stories because it puts skin on theology, right? Or theory or whatever it is. So
when people can say, hey, I had those same questions or I have those same questions or I had that same struggle or have that same struggle, there's this, relatability to the story that they get drawn in and think, man, maybe God could do the same thing for me.
Yeah, and that's what I love about telling the stories that we get to tell, because often it's not the like super religious, like deep theological guy. It's like, no, dude, this is like the everyday Joe who still struggles with X, Y, and Z, but God's redeeming these parts of his life, and that's worth celebrating. So
and I think it just brings up, it highlights again the idea that just every story matters. Like whether you have walked through just crazy, tragic stuff or like Ted kind of alluded to, is like you've just been faithful. You came to faith at a young age and you've been faithful for decades. It's like that story still matters because people look at that and say, wow, like I mean, there was a girl in a small group that I sat in a few years ago, and a few of us were people who had come from families, parents never got divorced. We kind of grew up, and she came from a family where her parents were divorced, and she had just been through some crazy stuff. And we were kind of sitting there, like almost feeling guilty about our stories because it's like, I don't know, I just have never really had any like real hardship and struggle, and so I feel like that kind of makes my story like not as valid. And she was like, no, like your story gives me hope for my kids. That like that's what I want for them, that they can say my parents stayed married and I got to see what a thriving, healthy marriage looked like, and my you came to faith at a young age, and I want that for my kid to be able to say when they're 30, I've been a Christian for 20 something years, like so it was a really powerful moment for me, and just reinforced that idea that it's like, dude, yeah, that story matters. Like if you think it doesn't, like it does. So. I always want to help people.
And people like that still preach the gospel to themselves day in and day out for different things. It may not be falling off the bandwagon, but it may be their struggle with pride or something. I mean, again, we're all still broken people.
One more note on the cache, if I can. So we have 112 stories, like I said at the beginning, in the cache, which is great. 112 stories, that's a lot of stories. But I know there's a lot more than 112 people that go to our church. And so, if you got a story out there that you're sitting on, you should send that our way.
Yeah. So how would they do that? Just we got a quick plug for you. So how do people get a hold of you so they can get in that cache?
Yeah. So you can email me directly. I will tell you my email directly. It's jcoffey, COFFEY, @clearcreek.org. You can literally send me an email and just tell me a little bit about your story. We also have a story form that we'll promote probably through this Restoried series, where you can drop some stuff in there. And then we have story volunteers at almost all of our campuses. we're still looking for somebody at 528. So 528 people, let me know.
And we'll
But-
we'll link it. We'll link it to what you're listening to.
Jon Crump will
It'll
link
be
it.
it'll be everywhere.
All right, hey, one last plug though. We've talked a lot about different stories that we have and how people need to go and check them out. Jon Crump, where can they find some of these stories?
Clear Creek Resources. Go to clearcreekresources.org. You can find all of those stories there. You can find them on Clear Creek Resources, at Clear Creek Resources on Facebook and Instagram. On social, you can get those pushed to you. Really, the best place is the website. So, yeah, I mean, it's also going to be linked below. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, cool. Thank you, guys. I appreciate everything you do. It is such an important ministry within the church, and it's so encouraging to hear how you're impacted by it, and you should know how many people are impacted by it. And so, I appreciate what you do so much.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for having us, Ryan.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for checking out this video. If you haven't yet, make sure that you hit subscribe down below and check out clearcreekresources.org, where we have videos, books, and sermons on there, as well as our audio podcast. Thanks for watching.